Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Chatter. This week we're joined by Rebecca King, who is a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and is passionate about helping adults who struggle with binge eating, chronic dieting, and body image issues to find food freedom and improve their self-esteem. Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Alex. I'm super excited to be here.
It's fascinating because it's quite a niche industry to get into, dietitian, nutrition as it is, but then to also throw in the ADHD niche. So I guess my first question is, if we sort of zoom out, and was there anything that happened in your life that led you towards the path of becoming an ADHD dietitian nutritionist?
I think when I decided to become a dietitian, I don't think ADHD was even like part of, I would say it definitely wasn't like anything I considered as part of like doing like who I would want to work with or anything like that. But my complicated relationship with food I kind of swung from anorexia to binge eating. And for me, that weird relationship I always had with food, I was like, I think I want to go into nutrition. Like I took a class I was in nursing school actually. I knew I wanted to help people in some capacity, I guess. And I took a nutrition class in my nursing program and I loved it. And then I met with the professor who was a dietitian and kind of like asked her about what she did. And I, of course, like my GPA, because we had like 2 divisions in our nursing program, and my GPA was like 0.04 something like off to get into the second part of the program. Like I missed they did like X amount of students and then they'd cut you off. And so I was just like, I was like 13 spots away from getting in. And I was like, this lady was a dietitian. So I went and chatted with her and I was like, wait, if I'm a dietitian, I don't have to work you don't really work holidays. You don't work night shifts, like if you're in a hospital setting. And it was just like, oh, this seems like a little bit better of a fit. I definitely had not worked through all my food issues at the time in my undergrad, but it kind of like led me down that path. And then it wasn't until I started deciding I wanted to have my own practice and kind of working with one of my really good friends, and then thinking about my own relationship with food, where I was like, there's this whole ADHD component that nobody's talking about with eating, of like, especially being medicated, not eating all day, and then just being ravenous and binging when your meds wear off. And I was like, no one's talking about this. And at the time, back in 2020, like most nutrition resources were for kids, like the very like eat this, not that, or like how to feed a kid who's on stimulants and things like that. And it was just, I was like, what happens when all of us become adults and then we have to feed ourselves, and, you know, all the executive function that goes into preparing food. And I was like, there's just no resources that are geared towards adults with food and ADHD. So
what point did you find out that you had ADHD yourself?
Yeah, definitely had some like little moments along the way in life where I was like, I think I might have ADHD, but it wasn't until my sophomore year of college, when I was 19, that I started like bringing it up with my therapist and kind of going through all the evaluation process and all of that. Cause it's like, yeah, I did, like, I feel like a lot of women, I did pretty well in school when I was, elementary, middle school, high school. I did pretty well. My mom kept me in sports, so I was always busy and doing things. And then once I got to college, and like that whole routine that was built for me and that structure was gone, and I just couldn't function and do things, and everything felt like I had to work 10 times harder than everyone else around me to just do the bare minimum. And my freshman year was really rough. I'm glad I made it through. But it was then, once I brought it by sophomore year, like it was like, okay, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. But I never really connected it to like a lot of things other than school either. So
do you think ADHD played a part in your eating habits when you were younger?
Yeah, I didn't. So my junior year of high school, I moved from Georgia to North Carolina. And I remember in that process of moving, I was like, I can't control anything in my life, but I can control food. And so that's kind of how I just kind of got hyper fixated on eating as like healthy as possible, and ended up engaging in very disordered eating behaviors. But it just felt like the one thing that I could control. And looking back, I'm like, oh, your brain was really chaotic. And this gave you an outlet for everything. And moving obviously can be a lot too. But looking back, I'm like, oh, that should have been like a sign. It was definitely one sign. And I've seen that from other people where they felt like things were so out of control from other women that that they hyperfixated on food. And so I was like, interesting.
It's interesting because I think of my own journey with food and the emotional dysregulation that I think plays a part in my eating habits sometimes.
Yeah.
And you're nodding when I say the word emotional dysregulation. And I think you know exactly what I mean. And how big a part do you think that does emotional dysregulation play in someone's eating habits if they struggle with it?
I think a big part, and I think I work with a lot of people, a lot of ADHDers who, would describe themselves as emotional eaters. And I think a lot of that does stem from emotional dysregulation, and that's not always like it's more acknowledged now, but I think weren't as aware of how much emotional dysregulation played a part of ADHD. So I think there's a lot of people who didn't really kind of put those two things together. So it's like, yeah, I'm just an emotional eater, and they kind of put it in this other category, but don't really understand like, oh, that is because I'm trying to regulate my emotions as someone who has ADHD, and food is one way that we can do that. That is accessible. It's tasty, and it's something we can unfortunately end up relying on a little bit more.
You alluded to earlier, you mentioned that you had a quite a severe episode with problem eating. At the time, did you know that the ADHD was perhaps the reason behind that?
No, I really didn't connect. Like, I definitely think I have the ADHD and then like just wanting to exist in a very thin body and all of like the diet culture stuff. Definitely not immune to that as an ADHDer. So that definitely played a part, but also didn't really realize that there was things with ADHD. Even looking back on like my childhood, like eating for stimulation, I was a kid who always had snacks. I had very specific snacks for different classes so that I could pay attention, and I was very good at or gum, and I was very good at being able to sneak it so I couldn't get in trouble or things like that. Because sometimes they don't let you eat in class or let you chew gum in class, and I'd be like, I have to do this or I can't sit still. So I definitely like there's things along the way that kind of made me realize that where I'd come home from school and definitely be very emotionally dysregulated and eat like a massive bowl of ice cream pretty much like every day through middle school and high school, and things like that. So I definitely, looking back now, I can see those places, but I never really connected it with ADHD.
Thanks for sharing that, by the way. I think it's so helpful because I think a lot of people will relate to what you said. And it's interesting, you say eating for stimulation, because it's something that, it's a phrase that I've never put the two and two together before, but actually it makes total sense because I sometimes eat. I'm eating because I want to get some kind of pleasure reward, sensation, some kind of, maybe I'm just bored. Yeah. So when you say eating for stimulation, is that kind of what you mean? And do you have any other examples of how that can sometimes show its face? Yeah.
Studying's a good one, or like while you're doing work and like, let's say you have a really boring like spreadsheet or something you have to fill out, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to grab a bag of chips or whatever so I can like munch and work kind of thing. TV is another really good one where like it's often not stimulating enough for ADHD brains to just sit and watch TV. So then, grabbing a snack so you can actually be able to sit down and do that. And then you might also get a little conditioned to that. Like when I sit down to watch my shows, I have to have my snacks. But definitely, that would be something. Sometimes like procrastinating, I think that can also be kind of like a way to initiate a task. I've seen with some of my clients where like, I need to have this snack or this thing before I can kind of start. It's almost like giving your brain that executive fuel kind of to get you going.
I can sit in front of the TV in the evenings and I'm not hungry. I don't need really to put anything inside my body, but I'm yearning for an ice lolly, or I'm yearning for a bag of crisps. And I think about why that is. And actually, I think it's just to give me something to do because the TV isn't giving me enough.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like I usually keep fidgets around when I'm watching TV or things because I'm like, I know that I'm not hungry. Like if I've just had dinner and I'm sitting down to watch TV, like definitely not hungry. I just ate. And I'll sit down and be like, I'm going to grab this fidget because it's going to occupy my hands. And then if I'm still like, if I realize an hour later I'm still hungry, like I'll go have a snack or something. But if it usually just putting something in my hands is enough to like help me actually be able to sit down and be able to watch my shows, especially with my partner who would be like, can you please just sit down and watch the show and stop getting up? And that helps me kind of actually be able to do that.
The simple suggestion of just having a fidget toy is such a good one, and it's something I'd never even thought of before. Something that would just perhaps save you from putting something that perhaps isn't healthy or, necessary, like a sugary ice lolly. I can have 3 whilst I watch a film, and that's probably way too much sugar for one sitting. But with is there any other things you could recommend, or from your experience, that perhaps similar to a fidget toy, but something else that might give you that stimulation rather than reaching for a bag of crisps, say?
Some of my clients like crocheting or knitting. When I was in high school, I used to make friendship bracelets while I watched TV. I'm trying to think of other things people do, like puzzles. Like if you do like to do puzzles, like things that are just kind of like help keep you engaged a little bit. Even like for some people, like going in, like if you do have like a treadmill or something, putting your show on and watching it in front of that, so you're getting some movement in, which is obviously going to be a good way to get some stimulation. So those would be a couple of things that I could think of. I've seen people use like little like balancing sort of things or something like that, so they're kind of doing something else while they're watching a show. Because I know it's kind of thinking about like what you can do alongside something else, so you can actually be able to pay attention to what the other thing that you're trying to.
That's really good advice, and I think I'm going to reach for that. Those big like inflatable gym balls you can get.
Yeah.
Where you kind of just sit on them. They're quite squidgy. For example, I've got one in my flat, and I could maybe just try and do some exercises or just try and sit on that instead of.
Yeah. I used to do that when I was a kid. And now that you mentioned that, my mom in our little like playroom workout room, she had an exercise ball, and I could probably sit on that or play with that for hours.
There's a phrase that I've seen on your socials quite a few times, and it's called intuitive eating.
Yes.
And could you explain what you mean by intuitive eating?
Yeah, it is. It's basically, it's a self-care framework around eating. So it's a non-diet approach to nutrition. So that might be where it's different from things like the normal diets and things that people do, where there aren't a lot of hard, fast rules around what you can and can't eat, or like using a lot of like external tools to track and like measure, measuring, weighing, doing all of that with your food, and kind of learning how to use our hunger and our fullness as a guide, and also kind of looking at our emotional relationship with food as well, and kind of, acknowledging that like food probably isn't going to fix our problems, or, help us actually, it might provide a Band-Aid, kind of some temporary relief for things. But being able to actually be like, okay, food is not, it's probably going to cause more harm than good in terms of like emotionally eating. So can I have other tools? Just like when I talk about eating for stimulation, I kind of put that in the same area as emotional eating, of like, what other tools can I use so that, food can be a part of that, but it's not the only thing I go to if I'm feeling lonely or I'm stressed out or whatever it is, of having more tools there. So it's kind of being able to make more intentional food choices. And I know intuitive eating often sounds crazy to people because they're like, if I can just eat whatever I want, whenever I want, I'll eat cake and cookies and all of the things. But it's using how foods feel in our body to drive our food choices versus just listening to like some sort of external diet thing. Not that it disregards nutrition, because it definitely does not disregard nutrition, but just kind of, I usually explain to my clients as like removing the should with eating and figuring out what works best for you. Because I think especially for ADHD, or sometimes the traditional nutrition advice often just doesn't quite work or isn't a sustainable approach. Like a lot of times in the US, everyone will be like, hey, meal prep on Sundays and you're good to go. And my clients are like, I, A, don't want to spend 6 hours in my house, meal prepping, and B, by Tuesday, I'm bored of that food, or it gives me, you know, the sensory ick and I don't want to touch it anymore. So like that strategy doesn't work, but thank you for the suggestion kind of thing. Sorry, I kind of went on a tangent, but.
No, it was fascinating. And yeah, I can, you know, it's a hard relate for me. And I think I can listen to my body and kind of understand what it wants.
Yeah.
I can sometimes fall into the trap of really liking a particular food and then almost obsessing over that particular food.
Yeah.
And then a week later, I'm like, yuck, I've had that too much. Don't want that anymore.
Yes.
I guess that's perhaps, yeah, you know, I don't know if that's a sensory issue ultimately, but I guess I wake up in the morning and I'm not immediately hungry. And I don't know if, I mean, I guess everyone's different, but would you recommend that you should try and force yourself to eat something in the morning?
Usually within like an hour or two of waking, like if you're not like immediately hungry, like that's totally fine. Like I get up and do a few, like kind of have a few things that I do first, and that kind of helps rev up my appetite a little bit. And then I have breakfast. But especially if you're someone who finds that you binge eat, especially in the evenings, breakfast is really important. And for ADHD brains, like ideally a high protein breakfast is something that's really helpful for kind of giving our brains some of that executive fuel there. So
I think what I'm a bit of a sucker for is I wake up and I'll wait maybe half an hour and then I'll have a coffee.
Yeah.
And then I'll have another coffee, and then an hour later I'll have another coffee, and that really suppresses my appetite.
Yeah.
And I often won't eat until 3-4 o'clock. And then I'll have another coffee, and then I won't eat until about 7 o'clock at night. And then I almost feel like I have to catch up, and I'll just eat loads and loads and loads in one sitting. And then 2 hours later, I'll feel like, well, that was lunch, so now I need to have dinner. So it's 10 o'clock at night. So I end up eating like what I think is a good idea, to just get my whole calorie count for the day, but in over like 3 hours. Yeah. So I guess my question is that something that's common, do you think, within the community? And is that healthy?
That is probably the most common like thing that I see, especially with my clients, is that kind of eating pattern of not really eating much during the day and then eating a lot more in the evening. My answer for is it healthy or not would probably be it depends on the person. A lot of times, you know, eating a lot in terms of like if we're eating the majority of our calories in the evening, like not just calories, but we're eating, let's say, carbs and things like that. If we're just eating those and then we're going to bed, like our body isn't getting to utilize the glucose we're getting from those carbs like we would during the day. Even just using our brains uses glucose, doing all, you know, typing and doing little things. It doesn't seem like a lot, but our body's using up that energy versus it's just kind of sitting in our bodies. And that can be not healthy, especially if you have a history of diabetes in your family and things like that. You know, making sure we're actually utilizing the energy we're getting from the carbs and things that we eat is kind of important. So like trying to shift the pattern a little bit can be really helpful, especially, or the other piece could be reflux potentially if you have any, if you eat too late and then like lay down afterwards, sometimes that can upset your stomach. So if you're someone who has like GERD or acid reflux, and you are someone who eats a lot in the evening time, something to consider and reflect on. So
if someone's listening and they related to what I said about my eating habits, and they were hoping to try and eat a bit more consistently and sporadically throughout the day rather than load in the evenings, do you have any advice for someone who maybe wants to eat a little bit more consistently throughout the day?
I will usually tell people to start small. Like something is better than nothing. So like if you aren't hungry, maybe you opt for more of a snack than a meal during the day. And the kind of blood sugar wise, which can be helpful with energy and things like that, like eating every 3 to 4 hours can be helpful. So even if it's something small to start off with, once you kind of get your body acclimated to eating a little bit more regularly, your body starts to kind of get primed to expect food. Like when I had a much more normal schedule, and my schedule fluctuates a lot more, but when I was working more of like a clinical setting, like when it got to be around like 10 o'clock, I knew when it was time for my morning snack, because I had just gotten actually pretty consistent, because my job had a schedule for me, that my body would kind of know when it was around 10 o'clock and it would be like, I'm really hungry. And sure enough, I'd look at my watch and it would be time, to go have my snack. So it takes, sometimes if we're not acting on our hunger cues too, they can kind of go away or get a little bit muted, because your body's just like, hey, you're sending me this message. You're not doing anything with it. So I'm just going to stop sending you the message. And then you add stimulants into that mix too for some people. And that, obviously makes it a lot easier to eat more inconsistently throughout the day. Because I have people share about like that, I call it the ADHD binge restrict cycle, when you're not eating all day and then kind of binging or overeating at night. And they'll be like, I'm not on medication and I do that. And I'm like, yeah, you could totally be doing this without meds. Meds just make it a lot, especially stimulants, make it a lot easier for your appetite to be suppressed. So it's a lot easier to just be like, yeah, I don't really feel hungry, so I don't need to eat. Versus if you're not medicated, you might have some of those hunger cues be a little bit more obvious. So
I never knew there was a name for it. And the binge restrict cycle, or the restrict binge cycle. I mean, it perfectly explains a lot of my eating history. And like I said, I wake up, I have coffee, and I don't medicate for my ADHD. So, but I guess the caffeine obviously is a stimulant, so it probably has a similar effect to people that do medicate, and it kind of suppresses their appetite.
Yeah.
And then it wears off, and then you just go hell-bent, and you always feel like you need to catch up. So no, it's super interesting. Binge repeat. So I guess the binge eating, so you're catching up in the evening, and you kind of feel like you need to get in a lot of nutrition that your sort of daily allowance. And I have a little sort of multivitamin that kind of makes me feel a little bit better. I don't really know whether they're as good as, I know I should probably be actually eating the real fruit and the real veg. I do try and get some of that in, but in my head, it makes me feel a bit better. Is there any, and I'm not expecting there to be a magic pill or a solution, but is there any just supplementations or any vitamins that really could be beneficial to someone who does struggle to maybe get in all of their sort of requirements?
Yeah, I would say that's when a multivitamin is kind of recommended. And for maybe people who don't have ADHD and don't struggle with maybe having any eating challenges, like as a dietitian, we're generally like, food is the more ideal way to get your nutrients in. But if there's reasons that you aren't getting those things in, like a multivitamin is really helpful for folks. If you are, let's say you are maybe someone who has a lot of sensory issues, so fruits and vegetables are really unappealing to you, so you're not getting in enough of those, a multivitamin would be probably a really good choice for you, because you're going to miss out on some of those micronutrients. So I think if you do struggle with it, that is something to consider, especially for someone who's like, hey, I am under eating, or I don't get in a lot of variety in my food, like in my eating pattern and things like that, it could be helpful to consider. Or if you do go to like your doctor and they do your blood work and you might have some sort of micronutrient deficiencies, then addressing those can be obviously important through supplements or food, if that is something that's doable for you. Because sometimes if you struggle with executive dysfunction around cooking and all of that, you might struggle to get in you might not get in all of the healthful foods that you might need. So
the executive dysfunction is fascinating to me, and it's something that I think has always played a part in my struggle with maintaining a consistent and balanced diet. Like I can go into a supermarket and just almost get decision paralysis and almost get too overwhelmed and end up either just grabbing a ready meal or coming home and ordering a takeout. And I'm sure that it's that kind of executive dysfunction that's kicked in when I'm in that supermarket, and I've just gone, I have absolutely I can't think. It's like a paralysis of thought in my head, and there's just so much going on that I just have to remove myself from the situation as fast as possible. So
it's like the lights, the people, the choices, like there's just so many things going on. That's like the last place you want to be a lot of times is in a grocery store, especially if you're hungry and you're like, I need to get food. I'm going to go to the store, and you're going to get very overwhelmed. I've had clients be like, I halfway through the store, I'm too overwhelmed and I'm just going to leave I've left the cart and just walked out the store because I couldn't finish it. I was too overwhelmed. And like you said, like, I'll just order some food instead.
It's definitely just, I mean, for me, it's not just supermarket. You know, if I'm just on Netflix or whatever, whenever I'm presented with a choice, often my
too
brain
many
shuts
choices.
down. And my default is to just go with the thing I know, which so often is just pasta and tomato sauce. And so I'm aware that, and I'm pretty sure that is my ADHD, which is causing that. So, and I know that that's probably not healthy in the long run to have pasta and tomato sauce every day, but it's kind of my go-to when I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So I guess, is there any kind of like advice for someone like me in that situation who knows that their sort of go-to when they're overwhelmed is not necessarily a good choice to sustain over a long period of time, but who struggles to make a plan to vary their diet?
Yeah. I think I take kind of this intuitive eating and all foods fit approach. So it's like, hey, if this is maybe it's adding more to your repertoire at some point of like, hey, are there other meals I make or that I can make when I have more executive function and get kind of like you've probably made your pasta thing, you know, so many times that it doesn't feel like any effort to do versus maybe a new recipe you've never tried before. Or what can I add? I always like to think of what I can add to something to maybe bump up the nutrition. So maybe it's adding some chicken. Like if you were to buy, like, I don't know if you guys have these there, but like a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store and add, you know, some chicken in there. Or like I usually keep frozen like pre-cooked chicken in my freezer. And so when I'm cooking pasta or something like that, I'll just throw it in there. Even like a box of mac and cheese, that's like a go-to for me. If I have no executive function, I'm like, I know I can make this. I'll add some broccoli and chicken to it. So it'll actually keep me full and be a little bit more satisfying and give me some extra nutrition there. So I think that or if you do use like convenience foods, same approach. Like if you were to use a frozen meal, I'll just kind of add more things to it or put something on the side. Like, oh, I'm making something. I can add a little extra bag of steamed frozen veggies or some raw carrots or something, just so I add some extra nutrition on the side. But something is better than nothing. So if it's between I could make this pasta dish or I'm not going to eat anything as a meal, probably making the pasta dish is probably the better choice.
I think it's great advice. And it's actually quite funny because I certainly have gone through those periods of excitement over getting better at nutrition. And I've gone and bought a knife set and a cookbook and it's turned up and I've gone to the supermarket with a list. And maybe I've made the dish once or twice, but the sustainability and the consistency in maintaining that, and then 9 times out of 10 I'm back to my pasta and tomato sauce because life gets in the way and it's just easier to revert back. So I mean, super interesting. So just add something that's not too overwhelming but adds nutritional value to the meal, like broccoli, like something. If there's things, especially like I utilize my freezer a lot because frozen veggies and fruits, like they're just as nutritious as our fresh fruits and veggies. So if that means you're not going to waste a ton of produce by it just going and dying in your fridge, and it just makes it a little bit easier, like keep some of those on hand. And it's just like, what can I throw into the dish and add there? Or if you have other stuff that, you know, is hanging around, or, hey, I'm going to add a little extra cheese in there to get a little bit more protein and fat in, or, you know, whatever feels good for you, you know, just, taking an addition approach, I think is helpful because especially if you know, hey, I'm satisfied. This pasta dish usually satisfies me and I enjoy eating it. Like, what can I add to that versus maybe trying something new that you might not know if you like can feel a little bit scary. So speaking of things to add, and I'm going to be careful because I know that when I researched this episode, I know I don't want to imply that there's like a superfood that will cure or make ADHD traits better, because I think the focus should be on Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think like my focus is always trying to be to put things in place that maybe just help with the consistency so you eat in a more healthy way. However, is there any, and I have to ask the question, I don't think I could do this episode without asking, is there a food or some foods that would you recommend for someone with ADHD that might help their focus, their symptoms, their traits?
There's some things, and the research of this is pretty mixed, and especially in adults, there's very little studies on nutrition in adults with ADHD. It's literally just like cross-sectional studies of what we eat, which usually I'm like, we already know those things. But what they've seen with kids, protein's a big one because it does provide the building blocks to build our neurotransmitters like dopamine. So protein's a really important one. And I find sometimes ADHDers don't often get enough protein because we like carbs as a source of stimulation. So we might be more carb lovers, which is totally fine. But just finding ways to like, hey, am I making sure there's a protein at my meals? And maybe if you do snack at snacks, is there some sort of protein source there? Omega-3s are another one that there's a good bit of. I'd say the most widely researched nutrient is omega-3s. The research is still a little bit mixed as to like how much of an effect it has. So if you like cold water fish, like tuna, salmon, mackerel, those sorts of things, it's a really great way to get in omega-3s. Walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, also a great way. Some people use fish oil supplements, but if you don't want to do that, consuming fish a couple times a week or just trying to incorporate in some more like quote unquote healthy fats can be helpful. I'd say those are probably like the two biggest ones that can be helpful. I think just in general, it's that we struggle with eating lots of like kind of following like the general guidelines for healthy eating. We struggle with just meeting those. So I'm always telling people, I'm like, we don't need to try and I know it's like shiny object, right? To like go try some new supplement or superfood or thing is new and exciting versus like, yeah, I'm eating, 3 to 5 servings of vegetables a day and I get, lean proteins in and I eat carbs that have fiber in them. Like those things aren't fun and new and exciting because we've all probably heard them a lot, but I think trying to do some of the quote unquote simple things, which might not be simple for us as ADHDers, but like the basics of nutrition, trying to focus on those versus trying to overcomplicate or overhaul your nutrition and do some sort of like crazy extreme dieting thing is probably more sustainable, just harder, not as fun all the time.
It's great advice. And I think from looking back, the periods of time where I have managed to maintain a relatively healthy diet, I've had a nice big salad, I've not just defaulted to the tomato pasta, and I've actually had quite a varied diet. I find that the dopamine that I get from knowing that I'm eating well actually improves my ADHD symptoms a lot. I think there's something, do you think there's something to be said about the kind of the increase in self-esteem you get from taking positive steps into try and eat more consistently and more varied, and that might have an actual better impact on your overall ADHD traits, like rather than just sort of going, oh, I've heard that there's a particular food that might help me focus better, so I'm going to go and just eat loads of that. Yeah,
I would say definitely. And I would agree with you, like, especially if you're removing some of that shame, right? Of like, I waited until I'm super hungry to eat again, and then I ate a whole bag of chips because I was just so hungry and it was the quickest, fastest thing. Like, I think feeling like we're taking care of ourselves, and probably not just with food, right? Like with other areas of self-care when we're, moving our bodies and, doing things to help manage our stress. Like, to me, those things are really like stimulating when it's like, oh, I went and did this positive thing for myself that like future me is going to be really happy that I did. Like, that feels good. And it makes it, at least for me, like I want to try to keep doing it when I'm doing those things or work towards it. If I'm a consistently inconsistent human. So like I will probably have periods of time where I stop doing the thing. And then I have to be like, hey, remember when we're doing that, it makes us feel good. Or I really like when I have that thing. Like I'm a huge fan of salads for me too. I'm like, hey, I really like salads. And then there'll be weeks where I don't have salads for a while. And I'm like, I kind of miss salads. I'm going to start having more salads again. And like, hey, it's a super easy way for me to get a ton of veggies in. So I'm going to do it. If you don't like salads, that's fine. There's plenty of other ways to get veggies in, but for me, that's like an easy way to do it. And so, it's just kind of, I think, getting back down. Because I think I always get questions of like, what foods can I eat to like improve my symptoms? And it's like, first, let's get the foundation down of eating consistently throughout the day. And then if there's things you can tweak and change, go from there. But if you're not doing that and you're maybe eating, barely eating all day and then only eating in the evening or whatever it looks like, trying to work on that first versus trying to make changes to the one time of the day that you're eating is probably a little more sustainable.
It makes total sense. And I'm thinking of if I know if I'm making a lifestyle choice, and it might not be a choice, but if I do something, if I make a lifestyle choice that I know is probably not the best. For example, if I know it's completely unrelated, but if I'm hungover, I know that's a chemical reason, but my ADHD traits really spiral and I'm just basically not able to function at all that day. If I'm doing something that I know is positive, like I'm exercising, I'm eating kind of well, I'm not drinking, I'm checking in with my friends, doing bits and bobs, I find it's actually like just the self-esteem and the shame removal that comes with making little positive steps towards a healthy and positive lifestyle, like have such a bigger impact on my ADHD self-medication than kind of if I buy some supplement on the internet or try and kind of force myself to take something that is claiming to. So I think what I'm trying to say is like, I think there's so much to be said for if you take the steps to have a healthier diet, it might not be the actual food that's chemically causing you to have better focus. It might actually be your self-esteem and your confidence raising because you didn't order a takeout, you didn't make that pizza. And that's giving you the dopamine, which is helping you focus more. Do you think there's like something to be said there?
Yeah, I could definitely see that being part of it because you're almost giving yourself that like, because we're usually shutting ourselves all the time. Like, oh, I should be making food at home for myself. I shouldn't be ordering takeout all the time. All of that negative conversation in your head, if you are actually starting to do those things, is going away. And then you're not starting off that shame spiral from, oh, I shouldn't be ordering takeout every night. And I should be doing my dishes and I should be putting my laundry away. And why can't I do all of these things? And I'm behind on my work stuff. And like, it all just spirals. It's like trying to minimize some of those areas of shame. And with food, we have to eat, ideally eat multiple times a day. And it's not like a thing we can kind of put in that, doing meditation or something like that. You could kind of avoid it if you want to. Like, it's not a requirement to function as a human being, whereas eating, we do have to eat. So you're always faced with that. If it's something you're struggling with, it's not like it just magically disappears or you can ignore it, because at some point you're going to get hungry and need to eat. So
have you got any tips for someone who, because sometimes I don't realize I'm thirsty until I get a bit of a headache and a dry throat. Like, and I don't know if this falls under the umbrella of nutrition, but hydration and water, and from what I see, it's certainly a problem with me. And I think, judging by what I see on social media, it's a problem for the community. So
yes,
have you got any tips for someone who just might need a gentle reminder that they need to drink more water?
Yeah, there's a few things. Smart water bottles. Some of my clients have loved those because they'll have like a little light on them. And some of them have apps so you can like track them and stuff. And have found that helpful. They're definitely a little bit expensive, but that's a tool. I've had a couple clients use like their like Apple Watch or something like that to remind them to drink water. I have had even a client remind them to go to the bathroom because they're like, I don't remember that I need to go to the bathroom until I have to run to the bathroom, which sounds really silly, but that's what happens for us with ADHD. So that can be, using tools like that. I even have clients just put alarms in their phone to remind them to check in with themselves, not to do anything, but just an alarm that's labeled, what do I need? And that could be anything. It could be a glass of water. It could be food. It could be calling a friend because you haven't talked to anyone else in a while. It could be going and playing with your dog, whatever it is, but it just helps practice checking in and pausing, with your body versus let me just go from task to task to task. And then all of a sudden I have a headache. And then you're like, oh yeah, I haven't drank water. Some of my clients will keep water in different rooms or places that they frequent so that it's just always there for them. Having a water bottle that you really like or is fun and exciting, or like if you like straws, finding like the right thing for you, if that makes sense. Kind of like figuring out what your preference is for like some sort of water bottle thing that you can carry with you. I try to bring water with me pretty much everywhere. So that way, if I do realize like, hey, I haven't had water in a while, I could just drink some, and it makes it a little bit easier. And you could probably use some of those tools too if you're someone who forgets to eat. Like I would say those things, both of them kind of can cross over. You might forget to eat, or you might forget to drink. You might forget to do both. So kind of, and if I forget to do both and I'm like, I can't remember if I've had a snack, if I can't tell if I'm hungry or I'm thirsty, I'm just going to have a snack and drink some water. So that way I've checked off both boxes and I don't have to think about either of them for a while.
Oh, that's fascinating. And I think it's, I try my best to keep water visible all the time, because like I think there's a real out of sight, out of mind element that comes into play. And as I said earlier, sometimes I've been at my computer for 3 hours and I can get that dry throat, and I'm like, oh, holy hell, I haven't drank water.
So it's like, why does my throat hurt all of a sudden? Like, am I getting sick? And it's like, no, your body's like, please give me some water. I have like I don't know if you watched SpongeBob as a kid, but there's a SpongeBob episode where SpongeBob like gets out of the ocean or something, and he's a dried up sponge basically. And like, there are times when I forget to drink water that I'll feel like that. I'm like, I feel like SpongeBob out of the water right now, and I'm just like a dried up sponge, and I really need water.
Oh, that's a great analogy actually. And I think I've seen a similar meme. I've seen quite a lot of SpongeBob memes, so maybe it's just another joke, but same character. Just finally, do you think there's an element of this kind of all or nothing behavior that seems to be quite prominent amongst the ADHD community when it comes to what people eat and trying to eat everything in one go? Do you think the ADHD desire to be that sort of extreme, that black and white, that all or nothing mentality, which I'm just talking about myself, but I think it's relevant to the whole community. Do you think that overlaps into people's nutrition and eating habits? Yeah, I think, and especially if you dieted, like there can be that like all or nothing in terms of like, I am super quote unquote on and doing all of the dieting things. I'm super into it. And then, you go on vacation or something happens and then you swing the other way and you're just eating whatever. And you don't, and it might not make you feel great. You're just like, I don't care. I'm eating and whatever I feel like. And then you might get to a point where like, this doesn't feel good. I'm going to go back to doing that thing. But yeah, it can be that way. Or just like, oh, if I have the pizza, I'm going to eat the whole pizza. Or if I have the thing, I'm eating all of it or I'm eating none of it. And that can definitely happen with people who don't have ADHD, like just because of like dieting and food fears and things where it's like, oh, if I have the thing, I'm going to have all of it, no matter what. And that can kind of be to like a response to restricting things just in general. Like when we're restricting food, sometimes once we have that thing, we want all of it. And then we feel bad. And then we're like, okay, I'm not going to have that thing for a while. And then eventually the cravings for it build up again. And then we're like, oh, I'm going to have that thing. I'll have a couple bites. And then a couple bites happen. And you're like, never mind. I'm having the whole entire thing. And that cycle kind of can repeat itself, even if you don't have ADHD. But I find there's a lot more black and white thinking that my clients have to work through, I find, maybe compared to someone who's more neurotypical. And I think not just, like with diet and stuff, but just trying to figure out what works for them and things too with food. Do you think this, expanding on that slightly, do you think there's a bit of the sort of all or nothing mentality that might cause someone to try and eat all of the daily requirements in one sitting? And just thinking about like in the past, my own experience, that's the only thing I can really draw on, is I've not eaten anything all day, and then I've tried to eat one bit of everything in the fruit bowl. I've tried to have a salad. I've tried to, and maybe that's during a period of like my hyperfixation on health, and I'm like, okay, I've got to have all these vitamins, all these nutrients, and I just do it all in one go. It's not sustainable because I don't keep it up. But do you think that is an aspect of ADHD and nutrition, this kind of like trying to eat every type of food type in one go?
It could be. Yeah. I could see that. Yeah. Like, well, if I'm going to eat, let me do it all and check it off and get it over with. Like, and then I don't have to think about it again for a while. I've like checked those nutritional boxes for the day. I could see that. Or like kind of maybe why like intermittent fasting for some ADHDers is appealing, of like, I don't have to think about food except for this one window of time kind of thing. And that's it, versus every couple hours I have to think about stopping and eating. And if you are preparing the food, doing all of that, I don't have to do all that. I just have to wait until it hits X time and then I can eat during this period. And for some ADHDers, it turns to, I just eat during that whole period, but I'm, getting my whole day's worth of nutrition in that period of time. So I could see that being the case.
Gosh, well, that's fascinating, Rebecca. And thank you so much for your time. I think that's a really nice place to end the conversation.
Yeah.
And thanks again for making the time accommodation all the way from North Carolina. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for having me on, Alex. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Rebecca.
Yes.